Welcome to the Michael Ouzas podcast. We are live. Today we have on David Woodside from Coach House Law. Welcome, David. Thanks for jumping on with us today.
Hi, thanks, Mike. Really excited to be here. It's really fun that you invited me, and hopefully I can be useful.
Yeah, well, I'm sure you will. I mean, David and I go back a long time, and I just thought it'd be great to have you on. You're obviously a real estate lawyer. Let everyone know where you practice and what you specialize in.
Thanks. So, as Mike said, I'm a real estate lawyer. I run a small law firm in downtown Toronto. We're about 4 lawyers, and we're growing a bit, so we might add a couple more lawyers in the next year. But my practice is predominantly real estate. So I've been practicing for about over 10 years now. I think I was called to the bar in 2009. So time flies when you're having fun. But the thing about law is, like anything, I'm sure Michael agree with this, is the more experience you get, the more you learn, the more of a resource you can be. So we've got a little firm here. We specialize in real estate law, commercial, corporate law for small and medium-sized businesses, family law, litigation, and some regulatory matters. So we're happy to be a resource to anyone. I think what people, especially people buying residential real estate, should know is that don't be afraid of your lawyer. And you can always you can't have enough lawyers. So and most lawyers will be happy to talk to you. People are a little worried because they think we're going to cost them a fortune. But when you're dealing with really expensive property investments, it's good to get a set of legal eyes on things. So don't be a stranger, and call us for our thoughts on things whenever you like. Mike's got a list of questions here.
Yeah.
And
No, that's great. We did get a good amount of questions coming through social media. I posted on my story yesterday, and I thought we'd actually kind of piggyback off what you just mentioned. So one of the questions was, why is it important to use a lawyer who specializes in real estate for a purchase or a sale? And we'll keep it to residential real estate. Keep it simple there.
Yeah, that's a good question, and it touches on a lot of things. But I would say, I think that question is coming in the context of, why don't I just use my friend who's a lawyer? If a lawyer it doesn't have a real estate practice, they might not be equipped to deal with your matter. And I think any good lawyer is not going to take on something they're unfamiliar with. The funny thing about law and being a lawyer, compared to maybe some other professions, is once you are a practicing lawyer, you can technically go in and learn and practice any area of law, but you probably shouldn't until you're competent or confident or have enough support to actually do that. So, it's once in a while you end up working on the other side of a file where there's a lawyer who's never really done a real estate file, and that's fine because lawyers are generally pretty supportive, and we sort of help each other through things. But if something becomes contentious, you always want to be sure that the person who's working in your corner knows how to handle a specific situation. And the interesting thing about real estate is, and when we're talking about real estate, we're kind of hitting this tip of an iceberg where I think when we're talking about real estate, we're talking about conveyancing, like buying and selling residential properties. But that's all based on a whole bunch of legal precedent and law, and in Ontario, the Planning Act, which is a very mysterious area of the law that is very complex. So a lot of times, even the most experienced lawyers will always come across an issue that might be new, might be novel, might be similar to something that's been encountered before, or there's been a precedent or case law dealing with it, but sometimes it's entirely new. So if you have someone who is well grounded in both experience, knowledge, and the law, it can really make the difference. So this isn't this is what I feel like. You go to a lot of lunch and learns with lawyers, and we like to tell you all the risks, and then scare you and say, oh, this is why you need to hire a lawyer. It's not this, but it is. Things can get pretty murky pretty quickly, and I kind of feel like we're always kind of uh, going along a really smooth road, but all of a sudden there can be a pothole without you seeing it everywhere. So um, what I'm getting at is. I don't think there's a problem of lawyers who don't know anything about real estate practicing, because it is it's not something you want to take on for the faint of heart. You don't want to take it on casually. Say you're a bankruptcy lawyer, you don't want to jump into residential real estate, or say you're an M&A lawyer. It's just an area you don't know. Just like I wouldn't jump into being a criminal lawyer and defend somebody for theft or something. It's just not my area of expertise, and I think I'd be doing more harm than good. But um, the most a lot of my really good clients are referred to me from other lawyers I know in the legal community. So if your friend is a lawyer, definitely ask them about who's a good lawyer to use for residential real estate. I think that's a better question, and I think any competent lawyer is not going to take on a file if they don't specialize in real estate. But the one thing, and maybe it's just topical because I've been dealing with it a lot lately, is issues related to the Planning Act. So a really good book that's really technical and really meant for lawyers. But if you're interested, you should pick it up. And I actually pulled it out here so I can show you guys. It's the law of subdivision control in Ontario. This basically is the foundation of all of how land and real property is dealt with. So it all comes out of how we can use certain land for certain things, and how historically how it's been divided and how it's allowed to divide and things like that, and how you can resell it and how you can transfer it and everything like that. So anyone who's getting serious about real estate law should really know that book. And the lawyer who wrote it, Sidney Toiste, is one of the preeminent scholars in that area. So going back to the original question, why is it important to use someone whose focus is practicing on real estate? Just because it is complex, and there's a lot of moving parts, and you're going to be well served by someone who knows what they're doing, and that doesn't just mean when things go wrong, because when things go wrong or get unusual or get difficult, you definitely want someone who knows what they're doing. But just making the flow of the transaction go smoothly and asking the right questions from the beginning, so you don't have to be asked random questions throughout the process, or things come up when somebody wasn't actually thinking about it early enough. So it's good. I don't think there's really a problem with that. I think any lawyer in Ontario, we've a pretty reputable bar. And any lawyer in Ontario is not going to take on a real estate file unless they're competent and they know what they're doing.
Yeah, awesome. I think super important. Great tips in there. And one of the things that actually comes up in a lot in downtown Toronto is status certificates. And the next question we had was, what is a status certificate, and why should it be reviewed by a lawyer? We either typically put it as a condition, or we try to get it reviewed before making an offer. Especially what we were in last year, where it was, offer dates and tons of action on properties. We tried to get that status reviewed before the offer date. So can you elaborate on the status?
Of course. I love a good status certificate. So why is it important to be reviewed by a lawyer? Well, it's not so much a lawyer, but you want to have somebody who can easily interpret what the status certificate says. And generally that is lawyers, because we are just doing that a lot. A status certificate is something that's required by law for a condo corporation to produce. And it's basically like a peephole, like a glimpse into the inner workings of the condo and the condo board. So it's one element of due diligence you can do fairly quickly and easily, and the condo corporation is legally required to produce it and disclose certain things in that status certificate. So, and the important thing is make sure it's up to date. A status certificate from 2 years ago isn't going to really tell you much about the condo today. And make sure it's for the right condo unit, because a lot of times I've been handed status certificates to review, and then we always ask, well, what is the condo unit you're looking at, and just to make sure the condo certificate adds up to the actual unit. But there's all kinds of things in there you can, and although you have it reviewed by a lawyer, uh, you should review it yourself. I think when you're buying something as significant as real property, as a condominium, you as a buyer, you should read it yourself. Even if you don't understand what is being said in it, then when your lawyer reviews it and comes back to talk to you about it, you can ask all these questions about maybe the questions you had going through it. The status certificate contains a lot of information, a lot of documents, including the condo bylaws and the declaration, which is kind of like the founding document of the condominium. And that can sometimes be hundreds of pages. But it also lists, it's required to disclose any ongoing litigation, any unpaid condo fees or special assessments raised. It shows you the reserve fund, which is kind of a rainy day emergency fund for the condo that's supposed to be maintained to a certain level and reviewed every few years by an auditor. And you can check and see when the last reserve fund study audit was done and make sure it's up to date. They also include all the financial statements. I would say most people don't do this, but it might even be advisable to have someone with an accounting or finance background look at the financial statements of the condo, just to give you a bit more of an idea of what's going on. But we will review. We kind of have a funny little thing at our firm where we review status certificates for our clients for free. And we were doing this a lot when the market was really hot and people were putting in multiple offers on condos. So I've had clients where I was reviewing a status certificate, once a week for several months before they actually were successful in buying a condo. But one thing about the status certificate is it's not all there is to due diligence on a condo. It's nice to see that in most residential real estate transactions, it's become like the standard. Like it's a condition that you will, when you're a buyer, no seller is really going to object to a status certificate condition in there. But it's one of many things. It goes along with having the appliances inspected, having the unit inspected, having anything you're concerned about with a condo looked at. So it's one of many items of due diligence. But it is something that is an easy one if you're a buyer to put into an agreement, and most people just accept it as industry standard. And you usually have anywhere from 3 to 10 days to review it with your lawyer before you have to waive or fulfill that condition. So what I like to do, and the reason I like reviewing status certificates, is because it's a great learning tool for my younger lawyers and my articling students. So if you read a status certificate and really get and everything that's included, it really gives you a good understanding, once you become familiar with them, of the inner workings of condo corporations and boards and things like that. So it's a good educational thing. And I like to use it to teach younger lawyers about condominium law. So that's another reason we are happy to review them for you. But once we review it, we put together a little report for our clients. And then if everyone is interested, we love to have a little conference call and go through everything. And just, it's more of a, even if there's nothing that stands out in the status certificate, it's nice to go through these items so people understand what they mean and how they work. And the other thing, just one last thing I always tell people about status certificates is, a status certificate is kind of looking backwards, from now backwards. It doesn't really tell you what might happen in the future. I mean, it's impossible to predict. So just because a status certificate looks fine right now, 2 weeks from now, something in the condo could change, and it might not be the a problem-free status certificate. And sometimes status certificates with tons of problems might indicate that the condo is actually being managed well because they're actually identifying all of their problems and they're working on them. And they've kind of, condos go through ups and downs. And sometimes I'm a little skeptical when a condo status certificate has no issues whatsoever and it's been around for a long time. It kind of indicates that A, it's just a really well-run condo, or B, maybe they're not paying attention to something. Maybe it's a cynical mind I have when it comes to that, but sometimes when I see a condo certificate that's laid out all of these problems and sort of what the board is doing about them and what they've been through to solve the problems, I kind of see that as sometimes an opportunity. We've already identified all our faults and we're working back up to make the condo perfect. So it's good to think about each of these things rather than to just score them. And sometimes I find my clients want me to tell them, is a status certificate good or is it bad? Well, it is what it is. It says things about the condo. Some of those things might not be good for you, but some other people might be fine to hear these things. So one size does not fit all when reviewing a status certificate. So it's helpful to understand what's in there. And then when we review it, you can make your decisions about whether something that's identified or a potential risk is going to be a problem for you or not.
Yeah, that's great. I think it's a great approach too, because then you unpack the entire thing, you go through it with the clients, and then you can say, okay, these are the risks, these are what we see, these are what could happen, and it's a great way to look at the status, and then come to terms with what do you want to do moving forward. Because if we do have a status condition, for anyone who's watching, if there is a condition of status certificate, you as a buyer have to be okay with the status to close on the property. That's the whole point of having the condition in there and getting it reviewed by a lawyer either before putting the offer in or after. So great points there, David. As we jump into this, the next question we had are, what are the typical closing costs or adjustments that a buyer should be prepared for before closing? Or we could do like buyer and seller, but your choice if you want to just do closing costs in general, or if you want to do buyer and or seller.
Yeah, maybe I'll just speak generally about that.
Sure.
Closing costs, I think, are usually interpreted as everything that's going to cost you on top of the purchase price. And they're obviously different for buyer and seller. So there's your legal fee, what you have to pay me. And most lawyers in residential real estate generally do a flat fee, which is nice. So that's another reason to lean on your lawyer. You could call your lawyer every day and have 2-hour conversations with them, and they're not going to bill you by the hour like we would bill you for everything else. I mean, they might sort of say, I might say, look, I have to get some work done. But it's kind of this, it's really the only situation I can think of where you're getting a lawyer for a flat fee who can help you with pretty much everything associated with your purchase or sale. Kind of a great deal in my mind. But all of the other closing costs are usually quite a bit more than the legal fees. So people seem to always be worried about the legal fees, but those are sort of a small component of it. You have things like land transfer tax. You need to buy title insurance. You don't have to, you should. And if you're getting a mortgage, 99.9% of the time, the mortgage lender is going to require that you buy title insurance, which I think we'll talk about in a bit. And then there's search costs, disbursements. These are sort of costs that we incurred as the law firm doing work for you. And we bill them to you. So we have a flat fee, but then we charge you for all of our costs. So, and lawyers sometimes vary on how they do that, but that's how we do it. And those depend on what you want to do. I usually have sort of a basket of things I generally do as what I would say my standard, searches and due diligence are. But sometimes, as a buyer, you might be interested in doing things that maybe are a bit beyond what the typical person would do. And if you're depending on the type of property you're buying, there's obviously different searches that may become more important. So, and these searches aren't when you're buying, say, $1 million, $2 million property, we're talking like search fees of like $20 here, $60 there, which in the grand scheme of things aren't that significant when you're making such a large purchase. So usually when we recommend doing a search, it's worth doing. But for example, searches we might not always do that you might want to do in typical properties. If you're buying sort of a multi-unit property, investment property, you might want to make sure all of the units are have the permitted legal use by the city to be used for separate living units. You might want to do a fire department search to make sure there hasn't been any violations on the property for fire code. Uh, a, a good one is to do a building permit search. There, you might want to do environmental searches if you're buying a property that might have had a history of environmental contamination, or is beside a gas station, or is used to be a dry cleaner or something. Environmental liability has become a huge expanding risk factor in property transactions over the last 40 years. So you want to be sure that you're not inheriting somebody else's problem. Um, and of course, we can walk you through all of the potential searches, and there's always a balance between what's worth doing and what the risk is. It may not be material to spend $100 on the search when the risk is a $20 bill. But those are generally all of the fees. When you're selling, closing costs would include the real estate agent's commission. Obviously, a seller pays the commission, and a really good website for calculating closing costs is called ratehub.ca, RATEHUB, ratehub.ca. There's a bunch of calculators on there for calculating all kinds of things like mortgage affordability and things like that. And I find it's a really accurate site. I don't have any association or interest in it. I just use it quite often because it's just a well-designed site. But yeah. So if you use a calculator like that when you calculate in legal fees, disbursements, closing costs, I find it's usually pretty accurate. And if you have a real estate transaction coming up, just call or email us, and we'll put a little quote together for you of what your closing costs will be based on what type of property is and what you think you'll do. Kind of the variable costs, though, are title insurance, because a more expensive property is going to have more expensive title insurance generally, and the big ticket item is land transfer tax. So in Toronto, you have the Toronto land transfer tax and the municipal land transfer tax. Some people like to say it's double the tax in Toronto for land transfer tax, but it's a progressive tax. So as the purchase value increases, the amount of tax you're going to be paying is going to be increase as well.
Yeah, those rate hub first of all is a great online calculator. I use it as well, just to get a general idea. Of course, it'll kind of guide you in the right direction, but also, yeah, the double land transfer in Toronto that kind of sucks as a buyer, and I paid it on my properties. Yeah, it's something we can't avoid here in the city of Toronto, of course. You mentioned title insurance, and there was a question I had actually a little bit later, but I figured this would be a good piggyback on that. We've obviously heard in the news about what's been going on with some of the properties that have been, sold without the owners knowing. And can you elaborate if this would even cover any of that, or what is title insurance? Why is it important, and why are lenders actually requiring it now more and more?
Great question, and that's super topical. I've had a number of people ask me in the last couple of days uh, about um, the risks of their home being sold out from under them without them knowing. And it appears to be that that's sort of a fraud that's going on in Toronto right now. I don't know much about it, but I assume it's enough. The risk is not new. There's no Usually when something like this starts to become a trend, it's because there's some new technology or something out there. But this is just old fashioned fraud where somebody is pretending to be somebody else, which which is crazy. And you have to be a really, evil type of person to put on this act of pretending to be somebody else. You'd have to convince, say you're trying to fraudulently sell someone's house, you'd have to pretend to be the owner. You have to lie to buyers, lie to real estate agents, lie to your lawyer, and through all of these things, for example, on my side of it, when I'm taking on a client, I'm reviewing their ID. I'm meeting with them to make sure I can tell that they are who they say they are. But it's not foolproof. I mean, if somebody really wants to trick a lot of people, it is possible. We're always trying to keep our fraud radar up to make sure, if anything seems a little off, we might escalate it in some direction. But this type of thing could be possible if somebody was a really nefarious character. And I mean, ways to protect yourself from that. I think as a buyer, you don't want to get in a situation where you're buying a property from someone who actually isn't the real seller. So visit the property, make sure it exists, ask lots of questions, things like that. Look at the history of the property. These are all, the more information you have, the more, for everybody involved, the more information you have, the more you'll be able to spot somebody who's trying to commit a crime. Title insurance generally provides protection from these things, but it's not something, sure, insurance generally isn't something you want to get in an accident for. If you know what I mean. You don't want to have to rely exclusively on insurance. So everybody needs to be vigilant and do their own due diligence when they're a buyer, when they're a lawyer, when they're a real estate agent, when they're a mortgage broker, anything like that. Just ask lots of questions, and if anything seems off, ask more questions, and don't feel silly asking simple questions about things like, how long have you lived here? Why is, you don't have kids? Why is there a whole bunch of children's toys here? Just anything like that, to make sure that the person selling the property has a right to do it. And ask, as a lawyer, whenever we generally ask people for 2 pieces of ID, and we meet with them to make sure they're of sound mind and to make sure they're not doing anything under duress. But if anything feels off, we'll ask for multiple pieces of ID. We'll ask for, ask to go and verify it with the ministry or something if we really felt there was something questionable going on. And I've been in a few situations where just my spider sense is tingling, and I decide, what, everything should be fine here, but I just don't feel like something's right. And so, I'll delay things, or I'll ask for a second meeting, or people to come back or give me more information, just to be sure. But it's not something anybody wants to happen. And from the only thing I know about it is probably what everybody else has read about it in the news. And it sounds like it's part of sort of a group of people doing the same scam over and over again, which eventually I would like to think someone's going to get caught and do a lot of prison time for this, because it is highly illegal and it's a very serious fraud. But having title insurance, it will generally, it depends on the policy, as long as there's no exclusions for something like this. I think most title insurance companies I deal with cover this type of thing. And it's also good to get further types of insurance, like identity fraud type insurance and things like that. I can talk a bit more about title insurance, though, and what it is,
Sure.
and the concept of title. And title is kind of, when we say you own property, we often say in legal terms that you're holding title. So you're holding title to the property, and with that you have certain rights. You're technically holding it for the crown, really. And you can, for example, some of your title rights are the right to quiet enjoyment. You can do what you want on your property up to the point of breaking laws or being a nuisance to your neighbor, etc. And you can have marketable title, meaning you can sell your property, you can rent it, you can profit from it. So things that interfere with those title rights are what title insurance is insuring for. Mind you, the title insurance company will exclude various things that they don't cover for, or limit certain things. But what, some of the big things title insurance generally covers would be, um, say you buy a house and uh, years later your neighbor gets a survey done and it turns out that your house or your garage or something is on the neighbor's property and they want you to move it. Title insurance would cover you for an issue like that, provide compensation, and make sure that everything is worked out to and amenable to both parties. It would cover small things like weird fees that uh, your lawyer may not have found, or not been able to find before buying. Like sometimes deferred taxes are hard to search for. They don't come up in a regular tax search. So sometimes you could get a letter from the city saying you owe $100 from 1985 for deferred taxes. And if you can't find whoever was responsible for that in 1985, title insurance would protect you. So little things to like big fundamental things. And it's generally a really small cost relative to the overall transaction. So it's worth it. It doesn't mean it's the best solution. And we have started to rely on it a lot more than we should. Uh, if you talk to, any uh, property law professors, they will generally say, "Oh, we should never rely on title insurance. We should, we should do everything we can to be satisfied that there's no problems with title, and we should not rely on title insurance." That's true, but having an extra level of risk mitigation through title insurance, even if you've done everything you possibly can, is nice to have. And the the thing about title insurance and the topic of us relying on it, it has allowed for us to speed up transactions, to make them less costly. I mean, if you were buying a property, especially when the market was really hot, you probably wouldn't want to spend the 5 grand plus to have a survey done and the weeks it would take just to make verify the property boundaries and everything like that. That's arguably something you should do because a survey is kind of a picture of a land done by a surveyor. It'll tell you exactly where the land boundaries are, where all the buildings on the land sit, and things like that. And that's really the best way to really know what you are buying. But most people don't do that, and they rely on title insurance. So if it turns out that, as an example, potentially the piece of property you're buying is a lot smaller than what was described in the land registry, once a survey is done, probably the title insurance company would provide some coverage for that. But there are simple things that we do, and I find different lawyers do different things. So one thing we always do is we always do a building permit search to make sure there's no open permits. But some lawyers don't like to do that. They would rather not do the building permit search and rely on title insurance, because usually if you buy a house and you get the house and it turns out there's an open permit that existed from before you bought the house, title insurance will provide protection for that. The problem is the title insurance company is probably not going to provide 100% protection. They'll have their actuaries, underwriters come in and say, "Oh, we'll cover 95% of this cost." And say it requires a lot of work, then your life is going to be disrupted by having contractors come in to get the work done so that the permit can be closed. So we like to do a building permit search, so we can tell our clients before they buy that, hey, there's 2 open permits, one for plumbing, one for HVAC, that are going to be need to be closed before the house is closed on. But again, some people don't want to do that, because if you know about the permit, then title insurance is going to cover you for it. So then you get in this position where you have to get the seller to close the permit before you take ownership of the house, because you won't have title insurance if you close, and you want to get it done beforehand. So if you're in a real rush to close and you don't really care about open permits, then you probably would want to do a search and just rely on title insurance. But it's not a great solution. And my general philosophy is I'd rather know everything I can know, even the bad things about the property, rather than just rely on an insurance policy. That's
Yeah.
my spiel.
No, it's good, and it also, like, as a realtor, it also, like, if you were to come back, the my client's lawyer was to come back and say, hey, we did building permit search, there's 2 open permits, then I can go back to the seller agent and have that discussion and say, can we try to get these closed before closing, things like that. It's always good to know beforehand so that you're not dealing with any
Exactly.
surprises after closing, right? David, I don't want to keep you too much time. We've gone over the 30 minutes that I promised you I would only take up that amount of time. If it's okay, I got one last question, because this one I feel like comes up all the time. On closing day,
Sure.
when do the keys typically get exchanged? And I always usually say to my clients that it's probably going to happen in the afternoon. Can you elaborate on what time typically, or why is it typically in the afternoon, kind of thing?
Yeah, and that's like all of these answers. There's no one simple answer, but generally, from our perspective, when we're closing a property purchase, we're trying to close as early as we can. The land registry is basically available from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. to register a property. Most of the sale contracts we deal with have the deal must close by 6 p.m. So sometimes you can close after 5. But basically, the answer to your question is the buyer will be given keys as soon as the transaction is closed. And that's a moving target. It can be any time during the day. We're generally closing transactions probably 1 or 2 in the afternoon. But sometimes, because of various little issues, or we're reliant on so many other factors in the transaction, the main thing being transferring money and the mortgage lender. So some mortgage lenders, some banks will advance funds the day before. Some, like BMO, generally advances funds the day before. Some banks will advance funds at the same time on closing day, 9 a.m. or 11 a.m. And then some banks, there's no rhyme or reason. They'll sort of advance funds as soon as they're satisfied and their underwriters have signed off on it. So that could be at 9 a.m. or it could be at 2, 3, 4 p.m. So if we don't get funds until late afternoon, we then have to wire all of the purchase funds to the seller's lawyer. They have to receive it, and we do everything by wire transfer just because it's most secure. But I find it annoys a lot of lawyers because uh, it can be unpredictable as to how long the wire transfer takes. It can take anywhere from 20 minutes to 3 or 4 hours. But I still think that a wire transfer is better than printing a check and having it certified and having a courier, deliver it. Because couriers, I find, are very Shakespearean in their unpredictableness. There's nothing worse than on a Friday you're waiting on a courier and they're sitting in traffic on the 401 or something. So I like the wire transfer, but that it does, nothing. Nothing is really instantaneous in transferring large sums of money. It's not like a James Bond or Mission Impossible movie where you transfer $1 billion from one account to another in like 20 seconds. It's just we haven't got there yet. So the practical aspects of a transaction slow things down, but there's no certain time as to when the house or condo or property will close. But we're trying to do it as early as we can. As soon as it closes, your lawyer will call you or email you and say, "Congrats, you own the house," and you will either pick up the keys from our office. We will courier the keys to you. And in this day and age, often there are no keys. Sometimes it's just a door code. So we'll give you the code to the door. Sometimes we use lock boxes where we'll give you the lockbox code and you'll get the key from a lockbox. Or sometimes with condos, a concierge will be holding the key for you, and we'll get it that way. So there's multiple ways, and with technology, we're not using keys as much as we used to as well. Lots of fobs, lots of apps, and things like that. So the access mechanism will be given to you as soon as you close, and once it's closed, you then own the house, and it's funny because it's kind of a very uneventful situation. It's really just your lawyer calling and saying, "Hey, we've closed. You now own the property," and then you can go to the property and go in, and you own it. So I kind of wish there was more like pomp and circumstance, like there was a big certificate that's issued and things like that. But it's a fun time, and anyone who's purchased a home, it is kind of exciting. But the actual key delivery is more of a hi, you've purchased your home. Congratulations, come and get the keys.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I usually just mention to clients it'll probably happen in the afternoon, just in case they were planning to, hire movers or something. I would always recommend the movers the next day, just in case it doesn't happen till later in the day. You don't want the truck sitting in the driveway for waiting for that call, right? But awesome, David. This was so great. Thank you so much for coming on. I think everyone's gonna really enjoy this, and they'll be able to watch it back as much as they want or need. How can people get in touch with you? How can they connect with you? Yeah.
Oh, thanks. I'm sure you'll put up my details, but our firm is called Coach House Law, so just coachhouselaw.com. And my phone number is on our website and my email. And feel free to call, email, or just walk into our office anytime you want. We're not necessarily going to be available whenever you call, but we'll try to get back to you if you leave us a message anytime.
Awesome. Yeah, I'll tag everything in the show notes, and thanks everyone for watching, for tuning in. If you like this, hit that like and subscribe button, and we'll try to get you more of these live Q&As as the weeks go on. Thanks, David. Really appreciate it.